I'm a horse whisperer, they say, but right now I can't whisper worth a damn thing to save my business. Standing in Thunder's stall, watching my prize stallion refuse every bit of food I offered, I felt my entire world crashing down around me in the Texas heat. The riding academy that took me 15 years to build was hanging by a thread thinner than Thunder's rapidly thinning mane. "Come on, boy," I murmured, running my fingers through his once lustrous black coat. Nothing, not even a flicker of interest in the sweet oats he used to devour. Mrs. Henderson, my biggest investor, was coming tomorrow to evaluate whether to pull her funding. Without Thunder performing at his peak, I'd lose everything. The ranch, the horses, the dream I'd sacrificed relationships for. I needed a miracle, and miracles don't exactly grow on mesquite trees in Plano. That evening, desperate for distraction, I wandered into Sienna's bookstore on Main Street. The redhead behind the counter waved at me with paint-stained fingers. "Author signing tonight," Sienna called out. "Romance writer from New York." I wasn't much for romance novels, but the wine and cheese table looked appealing. Maybe I could drown my sorrows in cheap Chardonnay. The signing was winding down when I spotted the last copy of the featured book. My hand shot out just as another set of fingers grazed mine, sending an unexpected jolt up my arm. I looked up into the most striking blue eyes I'd ever seen, framed by rich brown hair that caught the bookstore's warm lighting. "Sorry," the brunette said, not sounding sorry at all. "I've been wanting this one." She was dressed professionally, crisp white blouse and dark slacks, but something about her spoke of someone who spent time outdoors. Strong hands, sun-touched skin. "Take it," I heard myself saying. I was just browsing anyway. "We could share?" she suggested with a smile that made my stomach flutter in ways I hadn't felt in years. "I'm Hannah." "Audrey." I shook her hand, noticing the firm grip of someone used to handling large animals. As we chatted about books we'd never actually read, I found myself mentioning Thunder almost without thinking. The worry just spilled out of me like grain from a torn feed sack. "I'm a veterinarian," Hannah said simply. "Large animals, mostly." "What are his symptoms?" I described Thunder's condition, watching her expression grow more focused and professional. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, considering. "Sounds like it could be early-stage selenium toxicity. Rare but treatable if caught in time." She pulled out a business card. "I could take a look tomorrow if you'd like. No charge for the consultation." Standing there in the bookstore's golden light, holding a romance novel I'd never intended to buy, and a business card from a woman whose smile made me forget my troubles, I felt something shift. Maybe miracles did grow in Texas after all. Hannah arrived at my ranch the next morning like salvation in blue jeans and a tank top that showed off arms that clearly did more than just examine household pets. Watching her approach Thunder's stall, I felt my heart skip in ways that had nothing to do with business concerns. "Hey there, handsome," she murmured to Thunder, her voice taking on a gentle cadence I hadn't heard the night before. The stallion actually lifted his head, ears twitching forward with interest. I stood frozen as Hannah ran her hands along Thunder's neck and flanks, her movements confident and sure. She checked his gums, examined his hooves, listened to his breathing with a practiced ear pressed against his chest. "Definitely selenium toxicity, but mild," she announced after 20 minutes. "Probably from that new hay supplier. Switch feeds immediately and he'll be fine in a week." Relief flooded through me so fast my knees nearly buckled. "How can I ever thank you?" "Dinner might be nice," Hannah said, then blushed furiously. "I mean, as payment, professional payment." Something in her stammering made me bold. "I make a mean chili. Come back around 7? The hours until evening crawled by like molasses. I changed clothes 3 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out my eyes. When Hannah knocked, she'd traded her work clothes for a simple sundress that made my mouth go dry. Over dinner and wine, conversation flowed easier than I'd expected. Hannah told me about growing up on a dairy farm in East Texas, how she'd always preferred animals to people. I shared my own story of leaving corporate finance to chase my horse dreams. "My mother thinks I'm crazy," Hannah admitted, refilling our wine glasses. 30-year-old woman who can't keep a relationship longer than 6 months. "Maybe you just haven't met the right person," I said, the wine making me braver than usual. Our eyes met across the table, and something electric passed between us. Hannah looked away first, clearing her throat. "I should probably go. Early morning calls tomorrow." We stood together on my porch, the night air thick with approaching spring storms and unspoken possibilities. Hannah turned to leave, then stopped, looking back at me with those incredible blue eyes. "Audrey, I should tell you something." "What's that?" Instead of answering, she stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the lingering scent of hay and horses. Her hand came up to touch my cheek, thumb brushing across my lower lip. "This probably isn't professional," she whispered. "Probably not," I whispered back. Our faces moved closer, her breath warm against my skin. Just as our lips were about to meet, Hannah pulled back abruptly, stepping away like she'd been burned. "I can't. I'm sorry. This is too complicated." She hurried to her truck, leaving me standing alone on the porch with my heart hammering and the taste of almost on my lips. 3 days passed without a word from Hannah, but thunder was eating again, which meant Mrs. Henderson renewed her funding with a smile that probably cost me years off my life. I should have been celebrating, but instead I found myself staring at Hannah's business card, inventing reasons to call. Phantom lameness worked on Tuesday. Possible feed allergies got me Wednesday. By Thursday, I was running out of creative horse ailments. "Audrey, he's fine," Hannah said, packing up her medical bag after examining Thunder for the 3rd time that week. "You know he's fine." "Coffee then?" I asked, probably sounding desperate. "To discuss his ongoing care plan." Hannah's smile was cautious but genuine. "There's a place downtown." The coffee shop was crowded, but we found a corner table where Hannah nursed a latte while I pretended to care about my espresso. Every time our hands accidentally touched reaching for sugar packets, that same electric jolt ran up my arm. "I need to ask you something," Hannah said finally, her blue eyes serious. "Are these really veterinary consultations?" Heat rushed to my cheeks. "Would you stop coming if they weren't?" "Probably not," she admitted quietly. That afternoon she didn't leave right away. Instead, she watched me work with my evening students, leaning against the fence rail in a way that made concentrating on riding instruction nearly impossible. When the last student left, I approached Hannah with Duchess, my gentlest mare. "Want to try?" I asked. "I've never ridden," Hannah confessed. "Farm girl who's afraid of horses that aren't patients? Trust me." I helped her into the saddle, my hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. Walking alongside as Duchess moved slowly around the arena, I found myself studying Hannah's profile, the way afternoon sunlight caught the brown in her hair. "This is amazing," Hannah breathed, her face lit with genuine wonder. When she dismounted, I was right there to steady her, our bodies close enough that I could count her freckles. Hannah's hands came up to rest on my shoulders, and this time she didn't pull away. "Audrey," she whispered, my name like a prayer on her lips. "Yeah? I've been thinking about the other night. About what almost happened." My heart started pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it. "And?" Instead of answering with words, Hannah kissed me. Soft at first, tentative, like she was testing the waters. When I kissed her back, threading my fingers through her hair, she deepened it, pressing closer against me. The kiss tasted like coffee and possibility, like all the conversations we'd been having around the edges of what we both wanted. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hannah rested her forehead against mine. "I've never felt this way about anyone," she admitted, her voice shaky. "Good way or scary way?" "Both," she laughed, the sound nervous and beautiful. "Definitely both." That evening, I called Sienna's bookstore just as she was closing. "I need relationship advice," I announced without preamble. Sienna's laughter echoed through the phone. "From someone who's been single for 2 years? You're desperate." "It's about Hannah, the woman from the book signing." "The gorgeous brunette vet? What's the problem?" I told her about the almost kiss on my porch, today's actual kiss by the arena. The way Hannah seemed to be fighting herself every step of the way. "She's scared," Sienna said simply. "Some people take longer to accept who they are." "What if she decides I'm not worth the risk?" "Then you'll know she wasn't the right person," Sienna replied. "But something tells me she's already decided you are." Hannah had been coming by the ranch every evening for a week, helping with Thunder's recovery routine. We'd progressed from stolen glances to lingering touches, from nervous conversation to comfortable silences. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with possibility as storm clouds gathered overhead. "Audrey, look at this," Hannah said, pointing to where Thunder stood in his stall. But when I followed her gaze, everything shifted sideways in my vision. The bay stallion's coat appeared brilliant blue instead of brown. The wooden stall walls looked orange where they should have been natural pine. I blinked hard, shaking my head, but the colors remained wrong. "Do you see that?" I whispered, gripping Hannah's arm. "See what?" She turned, and her beautiful blue eyes had somehow become green. The brown hair framing her face now looked purple in the fading daylight. "Your eyes. They're different." Hannah stared back at me with the same confusion. "Yours too. They're silver instead of green." We stood frozen, studying each other's transformed appearance. Then Hannah reached up to touch my cheek, and I heard her touch as a low musical note, felt the sound of her breathing against my skin like warm honey. "What's happening to us?" She breathed, but her words tasted like cinnamon on my tongue. "I don't know," I replied, my own voice sounding like distant thunder even to my ears. "But it doesn't hurt." Thunder nickered from his stall, and the sound appeared as golden ribbons floating through the air. Hannah laughed, a cascade of silver bells I could see dancing around her head. "This should be terrifying," she said, stepping closer to me. "But somehow it's not." Her hand slipped into mine, and I felt color instead of skin, warm amber flowing up my arm. When she leaned in to kiss me, the world exploded into symphony. Her lips tasted like purple music, her breath felt like visible starlight against my mouth. The kiss deepened, more passionate than before, as if the sensory chaos had stripped away our remaining inhibitions. Hannah's arms wound around my neck, pulling me closer, and I could taste her heartbeat, hear the color of her desire mixing with mine. Lightning cracked overhead, but instead of white light, it painted the sky in shades of sound. The approaching rain smelled like silver chimes, and Hannah's laughter at the impossibility of it all looked like butterflies made of light. "We should go inside," she said, though neither of us moved to break apart. "Probably," I agreed, but kept kissing her instead. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless, the world seemed to settle slightly. Colors weren't completely normal, but they'd shifted closer to reality. Hannah's eyes were blue again, though they still seemed to sparkle with traces of green. "Did that really just happen?" she asked. "Unless we both had the same hallucination." That night, we sat on my porch with coffee that tasted faintly purple and researched sensory phenomena on Hannah's phone. Most articles discussed medical conditions, but then Hannah found something that made her go quiet. "Listen to this," she said. Recent reports from across the country describe temporary sensory crossovers in pairs of individuals. Researchers are investigating possible environmental causes. "Pairs?" I repeated. "It says here that it only seems to happen between people who formed strong emotional connections recently." We looked at each other in the porch light, both understanding what that might mean. Whatever was happening to us wasn't random. It was connected to this thing growing between us, this pull that had been building since the moment we'd reached for the same book. "Are you afraid?" Hannah asked softly. I considered the question. A week ago, I would have been terrified. Sensory distortions, impossible colors, the taste of sounds, but sitting here with Hannah, watching her eyes shift from blue to green and back again, I felt something closer to wonder. "Of this?" I gestured to encompass the strangeness surrounding us. "Not really." "Of us?" That was a different question entirely. Hannah was asking about more than just the weird sensory stuff. She was asking if I was afraid of caring about her, of whatever this was becoming between us. "No," I said honestly. "Are you?" Hannah reached for my hand, and again I felt warmth spread up my arm like liquid gold. "I should be. This is all happening so fast." "But you're not?" "Not when I'm with you," she admitted. "Everything else feels uncertain, but this feels right." Above us, the storm finally broke, sending us scrambling inside with laughter that sounded like music and looked like light. By the third day, the sensory chaos had gotten worse. I stood in Thunder's stall trying to determine if his leg swelling had improved, but every brown surface looked orange and his coat shimmered between blue and purple. The frustration made my head pound with colors I couldn't name. "This is impossible," I muttered, running my hands through hair that felt like it was made of music. Hannah wasn't faring better. She'd called that morning to say she'd nearly misdiagnosed a cow with pneumonia because she couldn't distinguish normal pink gums from the pale gray that indicated illness. Her usually confident voice carried notes of panic. But the strange thing was, when we were together, everything calmed down. Our perceptions didn't return to normal exactly, but they synchronized. We saw the same impossible colors, heard the same musical touches, tasted the same rainbow emotions. That evening, Hannah arrived looking exhausted, her veterinary bag forgotten in the truck. Without a word, she walked straight into my arms, burying her face against my neck. "I can't do my job like this," she whispered, and her words felt like silk against my skin. "I know. Me either." We stood there holding each other as the world settled into more manageable strangeness around us. Hannah's heartbeat sounded like gentle rain, and my breathing appeared as soft golden spirals in the air between us. "Want to try something?" I asked. "What?" Instead of explaining, I led her to my bedroom, where late afternoon sunlight painted everything in shades of impossible beauty. We sat facing each other on the bed, and I took her hands in mine. "Maybe if we stop fighting it," I suggested. Hannah understood without further explanation. When she leaned in to kiss me this time, we didn't try to make sense of the sensory chaos. Instead, we let ourselves fall into it completely. Her lips tasted like music and starlight. Her touch felt like colors I had no names for, warm and electric and completely overwhelming. When she pulled me closer, deepening the kiss, I could hear her desire as a low harmonic that resonated through my entire body. We took our time, exploring this new reality where sensation crossed every boundary. Hannah's fingers trailing down my arm looked like silver fire. My breath against her neck sounded like wind chimes and made her shiver with audible pleasure. When we finally came together completely, the world exploded into symphony. Every touch was music, every whisper was color, every shared breath was light itself. We moved together in perfect rhythm, our sensory chaos becoming perfect harmony. Afterward, we lay tangled together as our breathing slowly returned to normal, or whatever passed for normal in our new reality. Hannah's skin still glowed faintly golden in the fading light, and her voice still carried traces of color when she spoke. "Well," she said, "that was different." I laughed, the sound appearing as dancing butterflies around her head. "Good different?" "Very good different." We dozed until hunger drove us to the kitchen, where I attempted to cook dinner with vegetables that insisted on being the wrong colors. Hannah sat at my table, watching me navigate purple carrots and blue onions with amused fascination. "I called in sick tomorrow," she announced. "Me too. Well, I canceled my writing lessons." "Good. Because I don't think I could identify a normal brown cow if my life depended on it." We were laughing about the impossibility of our situation when my phone rang. Sienna's name appeared on the screen, and when I answered, her voice sounded frantic. "Audrey, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day." "What's wrong?" "I'm seeing things. Hearing colors, tasting sounds. It started this morning, and it's getting worse." Hannah and I looked at each other across the table. "Sienna, are you alone?" "Yes. Why?" "Oh God, you're experiencing it too, aren't you?" "Is Hannah with you?" "Yeah. But how did you know?" "Because I think I know what's causing it," Sienna said, her words coming out in a rush. "That book, the one you both bought at the signing. I've been reading about the author, and there are reports online. Other people who bought his books are experiencing the same thing." My blood went cold, though the feeling looked like icicles forming in the air. "What kind of reports?" "Sensory disruption, but only in people who've formed emotional connections since reading it. Couples, mostly. The author disappeared 3 days ago, right before several scientific institutions started investigating." Hannah reached for my free hand, her touch steadying me even as the implications sank in. Whatever was happening to us wasn't natural. Someone had done this to us deliberately. "Sienna, we're coming over," I said. "Please hurry. I think it's getting worse." We found Sienna huddled in her bookstore's back office, surrounded by stacks of research printouts and empty coffee cups. Her red hair looked like flames in the fluorescent light, and when she looked up at us with brown eyes that flickered between orange and gold, I knew she was experiencing the same sensory chaos we were. "Look at this," she said, shoving a laptop toward us. The screen showed forum posts from across the country, all describing similar symptoms. It started with the book signings 3 weeks ago. Portland, Austin, Denver, and here. Hannah leaned over my shoulder to read, her proximity calming my vision enough to focus on the text. "Dr. Marcus Kellerman. Says here he's a neuroscientist researching subliminal perception." Was, Sienna corrected. "His lab was raided by federal agents yesterday. Apparently he's been embedding experimental triggers in his novel manuscripts, testing how emotional connections amplify sensory perception. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. Hannah's hand found mine instinctively, and I felt her fear taste like metal on my tongue. "So we're lab rats," I said flatly. "Unwitting test subjects," Sienna confirmed. "But here's the thing. I've been tracking the reports, and almost everyone affected is describing it as positive. Couples are saying it's bringing them closer together. I thought about last night, about the way Hannah and I had connected in ways that transcended normal physical experience. The sensory chaos was terrifying, yes, but it had also created something beautiful between us. That's not the real problem," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "The real problem is what happens when it stops." Hannah pulled her hand away from mine, and immediately my vision shifted back to chaos, colors bleeding into each other like watercolors in rain. The loss of her stabilizing presence hit me like a physical blow. "You think this isn't real," she said, her voice sounding like broken glass. "What's between us?" "I don't know what's real anymore." The words hung in the air between us, tasting bitter and looking like gray smoke. Hannah stepped back another foot, and the distance felt like miles. "My whole life, I've been afraid to trust my feelings about women," she said quietly. "Afraid my family would reject me, afraid of what it would mean for my career in rural Texas. And then I met you. And for the first time, everything felt clearer. But what if it's artificial? What if these feelings are just side effects of whatever that bastard did to our brains?" Sienna cleared her throat loudly. "For what it's worth, I think you're both idiots." We turned to stare at her. She was organizing the research papers with sharp, angry movements that left trails of color in the air. "I've been alone in this, remember? No emotional connection to anchor me. The sensory stuff is driving me crazy because I don't have what you two have. Whatever Kellerman did, he didn't create your feelings. He just amplified your ability to perceive them." Hannah sat down heavily in Sienna's desk chair, her professional composure finally cracking. "My mother called today, asked when I'm bringing home a nice man to meet the family. What did you tell her?" "Nothing." I hung up. She looked at me with eyes that had gone completely blue again, the gold flickers fading. 30 years old and I still can't tell my own mother who I really am. I wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but the doubt had taken root now. Was my sudden courage about loving a woman real, or just a chemical reaction triggered by an experimental novel? "Maybe we should take a break," I heard myself saying, "until we figure out how to reverse this." The hurt that flashed across Hannah's face was visible, appearing as sharp red cracks in the air around her. She stood up slowly, gathering her purse with movements that looked like they were causing her physical pain. "Right. Take a break. Figure things out." She walked toward the bookstore's front door, pausing only when Sienna called after her. "Hannah, wait. I think I found something that might help." Hannah stopped, her back still to us. "Help how?" "Reverse the effects. There's a researcher at UT who's been studying Kellerman's work. She thinks she can counteract the sensory disruption, but it requires both affected individuals to participate together." "Both individuals," Hannah repeated without turning around. "Yeah. It only works on pairs." Hannah finally looked back at me, and I could see the question in her expression. Was I willing to go through with it? Was whatever we'd found worth fighting for, or should we just let it go? Standing there in Sienna's bookstore, surrounded by the scent of paper and ink that suddenly smelled like heartbreak, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could choose safety, choose to believe that my feelings weren't real, that this beautiful, terrifying thing with Hannah was just an experimental fiction. Or I could choose to trust that some connections transcend explanation. "When can we see this researcher?" I asked. The drive to Austin the next morning felt like navigating through a kaleidoscope while blindfolded. I gripped the steering wheel as lane markers appeared purple against orange asphalt, my depth perception completely shot. Hannah sat rigidly in the passenger seat, her silence more deafening than the radio that sounded like rainbow static. By the time we reached UT campus, I could barely distinguish buildings from sky. Everything bled together in impossible hues that shifted faster than my brain could process. Hannah had to guide me to Dr. Chen's lab, her hand on my elbow the only anchor keeping me grounded in reality. "This is worse than yesterday," Hannah muttered, as we climbed the wrong-colored stairs. "Much worse," I agreed, stumbling when a step that looked orange turned out to be 6 inches lower than I'd expected. Dr. Chen's laboratory looked like something from a science fiction movie. All monitors and equipment I couldn't begin to identify. The researcher herself was a small Asian woman, whose voice sounded like silver bells when she explained the procedure. Kellerman embedded neural triggers in specific word patterns, she said, pulling up brain scans on multiple screens. The triggers activate dormant synaptic pathways, creating what we call sensory bleed. In isolated individuals, it causes chaos. But in bonded pairs, it creates temporary telepathic resonance. Telepathic? Hannah asked, her skepticism tasting like bitter coffee. You experience each other's sensations, emotions, even memories at a subconscious level. It's beautiful, actually, from a scientific perspective. I watched Hannah's profile as she processed this information, noting how her jaw tightened when Dr. Chen used the word beautiful. Everything about this situation felt wrong to her, I realized. Not just the sensory chaos, but the implication that our connection might be artificial. The reversal process is straightforward, Dr. Chen continued. But I should warn you, undoing the neural pathways might also affect the emotional amplification you've been experiencing. Meaning what? I asked. Your feelings for each other might return to baseline levels. Whatever seemed intense and overwhelming might feel normal again, or less than normal. Hannah stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair behind her with a crash that appeared as golden sparks. I need air. She rushed from the lab, leaving me alone with Dr. Chen, who was watching me with clinical curiosity. Relationship troubles? She asked gently. Hannah thinks what we have isn't real, that it's just a side effect of your colleague's experiment. What do you think? I considered the question while staring at readouts that showed our brain activity in impossible colors. I think we reached for the same book because we were already drawn to each other. Kellerman's triggers didn't create attraction, they just made us brave enough to act on it. That's a romantic interpretation. Maybe. But Hannah's scared. She spent her whole life hiding who she is, and now she's wondering if coming out was just chemically induced courage. Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The reversal process requires complete emotional vulnerability from both participants. If either of you holds back, it won't work. I found Hannah outside, sitting on a bench behind the building where the world looked slightly less insane. She was holding her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking in a way that made my chest ache. Hannah? I almost hurt a horse today, she said without looking up. Booster vaccination. I couldn't tell the difference between muscle and artery. If the owner hadn't stopped me... I sat beside her, leaving space between us, even though every instinct screamed to offer comfort. But you didn't hurt anything. This time. What about next time? She finally looked at me, her eyes cycling between blue and green so rapidly it made me dizzy. I became a veterinarian to help animals. Now I can't even do my job. So we do the reversal. And then what? We go back to being strangers who met at a bookstore, pretend this never happened? The vulnerability in her voice broke something inside me. I closed the distance between us, taking her hand despite the immediate sensory overload that followed. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want anymore, Hannah whispered. Everything feels so intense with you. But what if that's not real? What if when we fix this, we discover we're just two people who have nothing in common? Then we'll figure it out like everyone else does. Hannah laughed, but it sounded like crying. Easy for you to say. You're not the one whose entire family expects her to marry a man and produce grandchildren. No. I'm just the one whose business partner walked out 3 years ago because she couldn't handle dating someone who cared more about horses than dinner reservations. We sat in silence, watching students walk by in their wrong-colored clothes, while our separate fears created a chasm between us wider than the physical space. Dr. Chen says we both have to be completely open for the reversal to work, I said finally. Completely open, Hannah repeated. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Being open with me, or being open with yourself? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. The sensory chaos was getting worse for her too. She could barely see straight enough to close the bookstore. We're running out of time, I said, showing Hannah the message. I know. Hannah stood up, her decision made. Let's go back inside. Walking back into the lab felt like walking toward either salvation or disaster. I couldn't tell which, and that uncertainty tasted like metal and looked like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. Dr. Chen positioned us in matching chairs connected to more equipment than I'd ever seen outside a hospital. Electrodes adhered to our temples, and monitoring devices tracked everything from heart rate to brain waves that appeared on screens in colors I'd given up trying to interpret. The process works by requiring complete emotional synchronization, Dr. Chen explained, checking the last of the connections. You need to share your deepest fears, your strongest desires, everything you've been holding back from each other. The neural pathways will only reset if there are no emotional barriers between you. Hannah gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white. How deep are we talking? Childhood traumas, secret shames, the things you've never told anyone. The procedure maps your emotional landscapes and identifies where Kellerman's triggers took hold. But it only works if you're completely honest with each other. The machines around us hummed to life, filling the air with sounds that looked like geometric patterns. Dr. Chen dimmed the lights, leaving us in a space that felt both intimate and terrifyingly exposed. Just talk, she said quietly. Let whatever needs to come out, come out. Hannah spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. I was 16 when I realized I was attracted to my best friend Sarah. We were at a sleepover, and she was changing clothes, and I couldn't look away. The wanting was so intense it felt like drowning. I could see her memory playing out in the air between us, golden and painful and achingly real. Through the neural connection, I felt echoes of her teenage confusion, the shame that had shaped 30 years of hiding. I told my parents I thought I might be gay, Hannah continued. My father didn't speak to me for 3 months. My mother cried for weeks, asking where she'd gone wrong. So I learned to bury it, dated boys, convinced myself I was just confused. Hannah, I started, but she shook her head. Let me finish. When I met you, when we kissed for the first time, it felt like coming home to myself. But then this sensory chaos started, and I wondered if even that was artificial. If I was using Kellerman's experiment as an excuse to finally be who I really am. The machines registered our emotional synchronization with patterns of light that danced across the ceiling. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly from her monitoring station. My turn. I've been in love before. Real love, I thought. Jessica. We lived together for 2 years, built my writing academy together. But she left because she said I loved my horses more than I loved her. And maybe I did. The confession tasted bitter, appearing as dark purple smoke in the air. I told myself it was because she didn't understand my passion for writing. But the truth is, I was afraid to love anyone more than I loved my safe, controlled world with my animals. Hannah's eyes were fixed on mine now, seeing not just my words but the emotions behind them through our strange neural connection. When I met you, I continued, I felt like I could love without limits for the first time. But then I got scared that it was too intense, too fast. So I blamed the sensory chaos, instead of admitting I was terrified of loving someone properly. The synchronization deepened, and suddenly I could feel Hannah's emotions as clearly as my own. Her fear of disappointing her family, her longing to be accepted for who she really was, her desperate hope that what we had together could survive reality. Through the connection, she felt my own terror of vulnerability, my years of choosing emotional safety over authentic connection, my amazement at how effortlessly she'd broken through walls I'd spent decades building. I see you, Hannah whispered. And through the neural link, I knew she meant it literally. She could see my memories, my fears, the way loving her had changed something fundamental inside me. I see you too, I whispered back. The moment we truly saw each other completely, the machines went quiet. Every screen in the lab displayed perfectly synchronized brainwave patterns, and the sensory chaos that had plagued us for days simply stopped. Colors returned to normal gradually, like adjusting to sunlight after being in darkness. Hannah's eyes were purely blue again, her hair the rich brown I remembered from that first night at the bookstore. But more importantly, the emotions between us felt solid, real, unchanged by the return of normal perception. Dr. Chen watched the readouts with obvious satisfaction. Remarkable. Usually there's some emotional dampening after the reversal, but your connection appears to have strengthened. Hannah reached for my hand, and her touch felt exactly as it had in our sensory-altered state, warm and electric and right. Because it was never artificial, she said, understanding flooding her voice. We drove back to Plano in comfortable silence, both of us processing what we'd experienced. The world looked normal again, but everything felt different. We felt different. Like we'd passed through some kind of test and emerged more ourselves than before. That night, we made love without the overlay of impossible sensations, and it was even better than before. Every touch was purely human, purely us, purely real. Afterward, lying tangled together in normal twilight, Hannah traced patterns on my shoulder that felt like benedictions. "My mother's coming to visit next month," she said quietly. "Are you going to tell her? About us?" Hannah was quiet for so long I thought she might not answer. Then she turned in my arms, meeting my eyes with a certainty that took my breath away. "Yes, I'm going to tell her about us." 3 months had passed since the sensory chaos ended, and my ranch had transformed into something I'd never imagined possible. Where once I'd run a modest riding academy, now a state-of-the-art veterinary clinic occupied the renovated barn. Hannah's practice had moved here, creating a unique partnership that served both our professional dreams and our personal relationship. "Your 3 o'clock is here," Hannah called from the clinic entrance, gesturing toward Mrs. Patterson and her aging gelding. I watched Hannah work, still amazed by how naturally our lives had woven together. She'd handle the medical examinations while I managed the behavioral training. Horses responded to our coordinated approach better than either of us had achieved alone. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Hannah's mother had visited as planned, and the conversation about our relationship had gone about as well as expected. Tears, accusations, a dramatic exit after one dinner. But Hannah had stood firm. "I'm 30 years old, Mama," she'd said quietly but clearly. "I'm in love with Audrey, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise anymore." Mrs. King had left in a huff, but she'd called the following week. Progress, Hannah said, came in small increments with stubborn people. That evening, we were cleaning up after a successful day of treating everything from colic to routine vaccinations, when Sienna arrived with a bottle of wine and news. "You'll never guess who called the bookstore today," she announced, settling into one of our porch chairs. "Surprise us," I said, accepting the wine gratefully. "Dr. Kellerman. From federal prison." Hannah nearly choked on her drink. "The experiment guy? What did he want?" "To apologize, apparently, and to thank us for participating in Dr. Chen's reversal study. Seems our case proved his theory about authentic emotional connections transcending chemical triggers." I thought about the man who'd unknowingly brought Hannah and me together through his questionable research methods. Without his bizarre experiment, we might never have found the courage to acknowledge our attraction, might never have pushed past our individual fears to discover something real. "Did you forgive him?" Hannah asked. "I told him we'd all found exactly what we needed," Sienna replied, "though I didn't mention that I've been dating Dr. Chen since the reversal process." We laughed at that revelation, raising our glasses to unlikely connections and experimental fiction that led to real love. Later that night, as Hannah and I walked through the pastures where she'd first learned to ride, I felt the deep contentment of a life that had finally aligned properly. Thunder grazed nearby, completely recovered, and showing no visible effects from his selenium poisoning months earlier. "Any regrets?" I asked, slipping my arm around Hannah's waist. She considered the question seriously, as she always did. "About the sensory chaos? No. About moving my practice here? Definitely not. About telling my mother the truth? Yeah, about that. None whatsoever. She's coming back next month, by the way. Says she wants to see the clinic you're so proud of." I stopped walking, turning to face Hannah in the moonlight. "She said that?" Her exact words were, "If Hannah is determined to live this way, I suppose I should meet the woman who makes her so happy." "Progress," I said, echoing Hannah's earlier assessment. "Definitely progress." 6 months later, Sienna's bookstore hosted another author signing, and we found ourselves back where our story had begun. The featured writer was a local romance novelist, whose books contained nothing more dangerous than predictable happy endings and gratuitous descriptions of historical costumes. "Should we risk it?" Hannah asked, eyeing the signing table with mock suspicion. "What's the worst that could happen? We fall more deeply in love? Discover telepathic abilities we actually get to keep?" "Terrible fates," Hannah agreed solemnly. We bought copies of the book for purely sentimental reasons, but our attention was drawn to a young couple near the poetry section. 2 women about our age, clearly on a first or second date, both reaching for the same volume of Neruda with obvious mutual attraction and even more obvious hesitation. "Should we?" I whispered to Hannah. "Absolutely," she whispered back. We approached the couple with the casualness of experienced matchmakers. "Great choice," Hannah said, indicating the book. "Poetry's perfect for getting to know someone deeply." "We met at a signing here too," I added. Sometimes the best connections happen over shared literature. The women smiled tentatively, and we could see them making the decision to be brave together. As they walked toward the signing table, Hannah threaded her fingers through mine. "Think they'll figure it out faster than we did?" she asked. I watched the couple in line ahead of us, noting their unconscious lean toward each other, the way their conversation flowed easily despite obvious nerves. "Definitely," I said. "They don't need experimental triggers to recognize what's right in front of them." Standing there in Sienna's bookstore, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of literary events and community gatherings, I realized our story had become something larger than just the two of us. We'd created a life that welcomed others, that offered space for love to grow in all its forms. Hannah squeezed my hand, and I felt that same electric connection we discovered on a night when colors meant music and touch carried the weight of destiny. No sensory chaos this time, just the simple, profound reality of choosing each other every single day. Our book signing line moved forward, and I thought about all the stories yet to be written, all the couples yet to reach for the same book at exactly the right moment. Some connections, I'd learned, transcend any possible explanation.